Hello everybody. In 1791, the US government did something unexpected. It introduced a federal tax on whiskey. What's ironic here? Many of the very men enforcing this tax, like George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, were the same figures who once led the colonies against British taxation. This contradiction would drive the Whiskey Rebellion, a conflict that tested the government's legitimacy and laid bare the tension between newly won independence and the realities of governing. For most Americans, the Revolutionary War was fought on a single principle: freedom for unjust taxes. Yet here was the brand new US government imposing a tax on whiskey distillers, many of whom were the very small farmers and laborers who had shouldered much of the war's hardships. For these citizens, the whiskey tax felt like a bitter betrayal, echoing the burdens once imposed by Britain. In remote areas like western Pennsylvania, where whiskey production was not just an industry but a barter-based economy, this tax felt especially oppressive. Alexander Hamilton, once firebrand critic of British policies, now stood as Treasury Secretary and the tax's chief architect. For Hamilton, this tax was more than a revenue stream. It was a way to test federal authority. He believed a strong government could unite a young nation, and a successful tax collection would prove that. But Hamilton was enforcing the very kind of policy that just years prior he had fought to dismantle under British rule. Meanwhile, the frontiersmen viewed whiskey as more than just product. It was their livelihood and even a form of currency. Cash was scarce on the frontier, and bartering whiskey was a common practice. For them, the tax was not only a financial burden, but also a direct threat to their way of life. Just as they had rejected British taxes on tea and stamps, they rejected the federal tax on whiskey. Their resentment grew quickly, and soon tax collectors faced harassment and threats from locals. Many remembered the days of taxation without representation, and this new tax to them was no different. As protests escalated, western Pennsylvania became the epicenter of resistance. In 1794, matters took a violent turn when an angry crowd surrounded the home of John Newell, a federal tax collector. After a standoff, shots were fired and Newell's home was set ablaze. The violence sent shockwaves through the government, now led by President George Washington, who was faced with the ironic duty of enforcing the very sort of tax resistance he once embodied. Determined to maintain order and assert federal authority, Washington decided to act. After unsuccessful negotiations, he invoked the Militia Act of 1792 and personally commanded a militia force of nearly 12,000 troops to march into Pennsylvania. The sight of a federal army marching against American citizens was unprecedented and deeply ironic. In any case, Washington's show of force was enough to quell the rebellion and make the peasants to understand that changing a flag on the pole did not free them from paying taxes. No, the same taxes simply had different names, but behind them were still men with guns to collect them.